what would you be happy with? And you can say championship. I don't think you should walk in to any sort of tournament. Listen, if they asked me if I were a player today, what would you be happy with? The Final Four, the Elite Eight, the Sweet 16, or winning a game? I'd be like, heck no, man. I mean, I expect to win the thing. I've already looked at the bracket. I've counted down the number of wins you got to get, and if that's where you are, that's great. I mean, I can certainly take that. And you tell me where you think they need to be. What would make you happy? At some point, for the love of Pete, this Tennessee basketball program, whether it's with Rick Barnes or not, you have got to be the type of team that can step into a tournament and scare some people. And I don't know that they've necessarily been that since Bruce Pearl. Have they scared people when they've walked into the tournament in that time span?
The Grant Williams team was scary. They were a 2 seed, and they got robbed against Purdue that year. They should have gone to the Elite Eight. There was a terrible foul call in the last second on what turned out to be a tying. Was a 3-point attempt. Guy got 3 free throws, hit 2 of them to send it to overtime. But that's the only time under Rick Barnes I think they were scary. I mean, look, under Rick Barnes, they've been a 3 seed twice, and they lost to 11 seeds both times. Last year, they lost to Michigan, and then they lost to Loyola Chicago a few years ago, an 11 seed, when the Loyola Chicago had that Final Four run. So, I mean, every year, here's another stat with Rick Barnes that I think is very alarming and disturbing. Every year he's been in the NCAA tournament with Tennessee, when his loss has always been to a lower seed. Never has yet made lost to a higher seed.
Yeah, and let's just turn this segment in when we resend this video out to, is this good enough? Because this is where Tennessee has been for a long, long time. And that is, I mean, you just talked about they should have beaten Purdue, bad call, then they would have been in the Elite Eight. Well, they should have been in the Final Four, but Julius Peppers comes on the court in the early 2000s for North Carolina. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. But at some point, I mean, even Bruce Pearl got Auburn to the Final Four. And is this good enough? At a football school, is this good enough to be knocking on the door of essentially a Sweet 16, Elite Eight every year, knocking on the door, hoping something happens, hoping somebody gets upset ahead of you and clears the path, or hoping you have a great night shooting or they have a bad night shooting? Is this good enough?
I'll tell you why it's good. I'll tell you what makes it good enough or what makes it not good enough.
For a football school, by the way, is the caveat.
It's good enough as long as fans are still interested in the program. Now, I would say there could come a point where this keeps happening, where Tennessee has a red-hot regular season and fans are just finally saying, I just don't believe in this team. I've seen too many Rick Barnes teams flame out in February and March to really believe that this early start means something. When that happens, I think it's no longer good enough because fan apathy sets in. And you can live with Tennessee's success in basketball right now, but you can only live with it as long as fans are still interested in selling and buying tickets. Once Thompson Bowling gets about half empty, it becomes a different problem. And it's like,
we saw that for a second with the Lady Vols, who turned things around, right?
Yes.
I was told that some of the boosters were showing up and hanging out in the press conferences longer than they did previously, that they were concerned, that there was frustration in the fans. Maybe it was still sold out. I don't know, but we saw some of that. But does it get to that point with basketball, or is it just something fun to do and that's good enough? I get to the point where I get very frustrated with Tennessee basketball. And somebody pointed out on the message board, Frank Martin took South Carolina to a Final Four. Bruce Pearl did. Forget about the ties to Tennessee. I'm just talking about a dude took Auburn to the Final Four. Auburn is definitely a football school, and South Carolina is a school. So the point being, if you want to tell me that I'm Mississippi State and I cannot make the college football playoff as long as it's 4 because it's too many things have to happen right for me. I don't have the facilities. There's a glass ceiling. It is not fair. Now, I could point to TCU, but let's pretend that didn't happen. Okay, Caleb? For the most part, 90% of the schools in the nation cannot make a 4-team college football playoff. So that's getting to the Final Four. Don't tell me that 90% of the basketball programs can't make the Final Four. Don't tell me that for a second. because the vast majority have a shot. And I would say a good 60% year in and year out, if they hire the right coach, could make the Final Four. Gonzaga was once called a mid-major. It ain't a mid-major anymore, Caleb.
Yeah. And also, you don't even have to be that good of a coach to get to the Final Four. When we just brought up Frank Martin. Frank Martin got fired just last year. John Brady took LSU to the Final Four when he had Glenn Davis at Tyrus Thomas, I think, in 2006. So, and then he was fired 2 years later. So, yeah, it's sometimes, again, this is what March is about. So the question becomes this. The question becomes, okay, you're right. Any coach can make it to one Final Four. Can a coach keep you relevant year in and year out to where there's some sort of fan interest in the program? Look, Rick Barnes does that. Whatever else you want to say about Rick Barnes, this is Tennessee's 5th straight NCAA tournament. They made 6 straight under Bruce Pearl. I think we all think if Barnes stays, Tennessee's going to the tournament next year. So,
yeah, but at what point does that get old?
That's the question. And it gets old when fan apathy sets in. And here's the one problem with Rick Barnes. And I will say this. It's funny because Rick Barnes was a Gary Williams disciple. He coached under Gary Williams at Ohio State. And for those who don't know, Gary Williams and Bruce Pearl are under the same coaching tree because they were developed under Tom Davis, which is they run the flex on offense. They ran the 2-2-1 press and things like that. And so it was fun to watch. Rick Barnes did a little bit of his, he put his own tweaks. He still runs a flex offense. He doesn't run as much tempo on defense though. So it gets to the point where the team, his tweaks make the teams not as fun to watch. If you're producing the same results as Rick Barnes is right now, but you're doing it the way Bruce Pearl was doing it in the mid-2000s at Tennessee or Gary Williams was doing it at Maryland, I think it's a little more digestible. But this team was number 2 earlier in the year, and they still had some fan apathy because it just was not a fun number 2 team to watch.
SC Scout guy says on the message board, I think NIL gives everyone an even greater shot. With all due respect, I'm going to disagree with you because I think it gives Tennessee a better shot in football because there is that foundational money where you can pay. I mean, Nico is not if he's the guy that got the $8 million and we all think he was, he's not the only dude that got paid to come to Tennessee because of NIL money. And Tennessee doesn't have to drop all their coins in one basket. But in basketball, if you're Duke or North Carolina or Kentucky, you can drop it all on one player and it can change your trajectory immediately. So there's actually, I believe, more competition in NIL to get the elite players in college basketball. I don't think it brings up the lower level programs up to the Dukes, North Carolinas, and the Kansases of the world. I don't. Not as long as you've got a coach that's preaching it's preaching this style of offense and defense. At the end of the day, if a kid says, I've got a $15 million offer from Duke, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kansas, and I have to play this style of basketball, what do you think that kid's going to say? He's got the money anywhere, Caleb. I don't see how NIL helps Rick Barnes at all. And I certainly have never heard nor seen any instance in which he has taken advantage of NIL money to make a splash recruit. Am I missing one?
No. I mean, I know Julian Phillips was a 5-star. I don't think NIL got him to Tennessee, though. I think a lot of 5-stars or 4-stars pick Tennessee. The ones that choose to play for Barnes is they know Barnes' track record of developing players, and they want to develop themselves a little bit better for the NBA. And that's why they choose to play for Rick Barnes more than anything else.
But the thing is, Caleb, this is what's so frustrating. The guys that go to Kentucky or the Kevin Durant's of the world, they don't need developing.
Durant would tell you he did need developing by Rick Barnes.
Well, yeah, but come on. I mean, he was going to be one of the better, if not best players in basketball history of all time.
Yes, right. No, I agree. There is a factor of, and this is more common in college basketball, I think, than even college football, where there is a benefit from developing in certain programs. The catch is the way coaches develop you for the NBA is oftentimes a hindrance for them succeeding at the college level. Dean Smith, rest in peace, only won 2 national championships. Yes. but he developed players for the NBA.
Coached as long as Methuselah.
Yeah, exactly. But he developed players for the NBA. Like the whole story of people would say that Dean Smith was the only person who could stop Michael Jordan. But the shuffle offense that Dean Smith ran had Michael Jordan perfectly prepared to run the triangle offense in the NBA and to really fit in with an NBA style offense, because quite honestly, usually primary scoring guards like that had no idea how to fit in with the team in the NBA when they got there.
Travis just said, man, we went to a ton of years just hoping to make the tournament, period. Travis, you know I love you. But why? It's because a guy named Doug Dickey didn't care about basketball and just wanted it to go be quiet and hopefully be somewhat competitive. That's why Wade Houston had to go 5-25 or whatever he went to actually get fired. This is not where you are in big-time athletics. And listen, let me ask you this. Basketball schools only. Would Gonzaga be okay with this?
Not anymore. They would have back in 1999.
Right. Absolutely not. Give me another basketball school. Louisville. I don't want to say Kentucky because they are football in the SEC. Duke, North Carolina. Would they be okay with just pecking at the door of the Sweet 16 each and every year? Absolutely not. And the reason is that Tennessee's okay with it because it's money. They want to drop as much as they can into football, especially now. And right now, they got this neat little Barnes thing going on over here they don't have to worry about. So I'm not saying it's time to replace Rick Barnes at all. But I am saying it's time to have a little conversation, like what are your long-term plans of the program and the style of play that you see moving forward? I think it's about time to have that conversation. It's not the old you fire your coaches or you're gone. It's nowhere close to that. Don't get me wrong, Caleb, but it's okay to have that conversation that, hey, I understand that you're up there in age and probably set in your ways, but you need to adjust something to get this thing rolling at a higher level.
This is what reportedly got him fired at Texas. They wanted him to move on from some assistants who had a certain style, and he wouldn't do it. In one of the stories with Rick Barnes that's notable, and I don't know if you know this, Dave, but Rick Barnes' coaching tree is a pretty bad coaching tree. Like it's a who's who of like Dennis Felton is a Rick Barnes coaching disciple, and Desmond Oliver just got fired, I think, by ETSU. There are just a lot of guys from Rick Barnes' coaching tree that just don't make it elsewhere. Nobody's really sick. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but that means something. Like, don't get me wrong, Nick Saban has had a lot of failures in his coaching tree, but he's had a few smash successes. Arguably the greatest. The guy who just surpassed him is part of his coaching tree.